Imagine a world-class swimmer stepping onto the deck of the Naval Special Warfare Training Center, only to find herself surrounded by 30 elite Navy SEALs who immediately start placing bets on how quickly she'd fail their underwater test. They weren't just confident she'd fail, they were banking on it. But what happened next left them speechless, lighter in the wallet, and forever changed their perspective on what determination truly means. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the San Diego Naval Base as Maya Richardson stepped out of her rental car, her Olympic gold medal tucked safely in her duffel bag. At 28, she had dominated competitive swimming for years, but nothing had prepared her for the skepticism that awaited her at the world's most elite maritime training facility. Her proposal to demonstrate advanced water survival techniques to the Navy's finest had been approved, but the welcome she received was anything but warm. Maya's athletic 5'7" frame, sun-bleached blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and confident stride made her an immediate target for scrutiny. The moment she approached the training pool area, a group of battle-hardened Navy SEALs exchanged knowing glances and began whispering among themselves. "Ma'am, you sure you're in the right place?" Lieutenant Commander Jack Reynolds called out, his voice carrying across the deck. Recreational swimming is in the civilian center across the base. His team erupted in barely contained laughter, their voices echoing off the concrete walls of the facility. "Maybe she's lost," another SEAL added, not bothering to lower his voice. "This ain't no Olympic photo shoot, lady." Maya felt her cheeks flush with heat, but she didn't react to their taunts. Instead, she quietly signed the visitor log, set down her equipment bag, and began methodically stretching her muscles, a ritual she had performed thousands of times before competitions. What they didn't know was that she'd learned mental fortitude from her late grandfather, Captain William Richardson, a legendary Navy rescue swimmer whose techniques were still taught decades after his retirement. Even Commander Blackwood, the gruff head instructor with 25 years of combat experience, seemed visibly annoyed when reviewing her clearance paperwork. "Listen, lady," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for nearby SEALs to hear. "Winning medals in chlorinated pools with lane dividers is one thing. Proving yourself against men who've survived the world's most punishing selection process, that's a completely different ocean." The warning hung in the air like the heavy scent of chlorine. Maya nodded respectfully, her posture unwavering. She had expected resistance, but the undisguised hostility in their eyes was more intense than she'd imagined. As she walked toward the locker room to change, she could hear the whispers following her like ripples in water. She only got clearance because her grandfather was some hotshot rescue swimmer, one voice drifted across the deck. Probably never experienced real underwater stress beyond holding her breath for the camera. Another responded with undisguised contempt. That afternoon, alone in the sparse locker room, Maya sat on a metal bench and pulled out a waterproof case containing a faded photograph of her grandfather in full rescue gear, taken during his final deployment. Her hands were steady as she traced the edges of the photo. In just 30 minutes, the real test would begin, and she knew that proving herself would require more than just swimming prowess. She would need to withstand a tsunami of doubt from men who had already decided she didn't belong. The sound of distant laughter from the pool deck reminded her that she was completely alone in this fight. But as she stared at her grandfather's confident smile in the photograph, she whispered the words he taught her years ago. "The water doesn't care about your gender, your background, or your doubts. It only respects those who understand its power and remain calm within its embrace." As Maya emerged from the locker room in her plain black competition swimsuit, deliberately choosing function over the flashier, Olympic-branded gear she typically wore, she immediately noticed something was different about the training setup. The underwater obstacle course had been significantly modified from the standard configuration she had researched extensively. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Equipment adjustments," Commander Blackwood said, with barely concealed amusement when she politely inquired about the changes. "We've configured the course to accurately reflect real-world SEAL operational parameters. You did say you wanted to experience authentic training conditions, didn't you?" His emphasis on authentic made it clear they had ramped up the difficulty specifically for her. Maya remained composed and professional, but the message was unmistakable. They were setting her up for failure from the first moment. While standard visitors received a thorough briefing and demonstration of the underwater challenges, she was given only a cursory overview before being left to interpret the modified course herself. Day by day, throughout her week-long visit, she spent her evenings in her temporary on-base quarters, practicing specialized breathing techniques and maintaining detailed logs of the current patterns, temperature fluctuations, and precise oxygen consumption rates she would need to navigate the increasingly challenging tests they were designing for her. Captain David Harrison watched everything through polarized sunglasses from the observation deck. Something about her unwavering composure under relentless pressure made him hesitate before joining in with the other officers' dismissive comments. In 20 years of special operations service, he'd rarely seen someone maintain such professional dignity while being systematically undermined. As the week progressed, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds' mockery became increasingly public and cruel. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present Maya, the one-minute wonder," he announced during a training briefing one morning, his voice carrying across the room. "Place your bets on how quickly she surfaces gasping for air when faced with a real challenge." The room erupted in laughter and jeers. Several SEALs actually started taking bets, writing dollar amounts on a whiteboard and passing cash around like it was some kind of sporting event. Maya continued reviewing her notes in silence, her face betraying no emotion, but inside she felt a familiar sting of isolation that had followed her throughout her career, even as an Olympic champion. The social exclusion became suffocating. During mealtimes at the officers' mess, conversations would stop when she approached tables. Training schedules were always changed at the last minute when it was her turn. Her practice sessions were frequently interrupted by urgent facility maintenance or mysterious equipment issues. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. "Maybe you should try something more suited to your delicate nature," Reynolds suggested during a particularly brutal day of preliminary assessments, his voice dripping with false concern. "I hear the base is looking for someone to teach water aerobics to the administrative staff." His loyal followers laughed on command, creating an echo chamber of humiliation that followed Maya wherever she went on the base. But she maintained her rigorous personal routine. Every morning at precisely 5 a.m., she swam 2 miles in the ocean regardless of weather conditions. Every evening she practiced specialized breathing exercises and mental visualization in the empty equipment storage room, where she'd found a rare moment of privacy. The breaking point came during day 5, when she overheard 2 instructors discussing her performance in voices just loud enough for her to hear. "She's been consistent, I'll give her that," one said, "but consistency isn't enough when you're up against the real challenge." The final test tomorrow is going to show everyone what happens when Olympic swimmers face SEAL standards. That night, Maya sat in her quarters, staring at her grandfather's photograph. The whispers had grown louder, the sabotage more obvious, and the isolation more complete. But something had shifted in her resolve. They wanted her to break, to give them a reason to dismiss her. Instead, she was going to give them something they'd never forget. The final test was announced with ceremonial gravity by Commander Blackwood himself. "Tomorrow's challenge will be simple in concept, but nearly impossible in execution," he explained to the assembled group of 30 SEALs and Maya. "The underwater knot series requires completing 5 different tactical knots in sequence while submerged, with no breathing apparatus, in under 5 minutes. This is a challenge that approximately 70% of qualified SEALs cannot complete on their first attempt. What remained unspoken, but understood by everyone, was that this particular test had been specifically selected because it combined breath control with fine motor skills that deteriorate rapidly under oxygen deprivation, a cruel combination designed to exploit what they perceived as Maya's weaknesses. As the briefing concluded, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds approached Maya with an artificial smile. "Since you're so confident, why don't we make this interesting?" he suggested, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've got $1,000 that says you won't last 3 minutes underwater, let alone complete the challenge." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Maya. She knew this was more than a bet. It was a public challenge designed to force her into a corner. Accept, and she would face almost certain failure against an unreasonable standard. Decline, and she would confirm their belief that she never belonged here in the first place. "I accept your bet, Lieutenant Commander," Maya replied calmly, extending her hand. "And to make it fair, I'll even add my own 1,000 that says I'll complete all 5 knots in under 5 minutes. The shocked murmurs that rippled through the room were worth every dollar she'd just wagered. Within minutes, the bet had grown as other SEALs eagerly added their money to the pot. By evening, over $30,000 had been wagered against her success, with odds heavily favoring her humiliating failure. The money didn't matter to Maya. What mattered was that she now had their undivided attention. That night, alone in her quarters, Maya methodically prepared for the most important test of her life. She knew the underwater knot challenge was designed to induce panic, causing most trainees to abandon the task and surface gasping for air. But what the SEALs didn't understand was that panic underwater was something she had conquered long ago. She laid out her grandfather's old notebook, filled with decades of breathing techniques and psychological strategies for maintaining composure under extreme conditions. His handwritten notes on managing carbon dioxide buildup and the precise meditation techniques that allow the human body to function with minimal oxygen became her final study guide. As she reviewed the complex knot sequences, Maya realized something crucial. The standard approach taught to SEALs required frequent adjustments and repositioning underwater, movements that consumed precious oxygen. But if she modified the technique slightly, using positioning strategies from competitive swimming, she could minimize movement and preserve her oxygen supply. Maya woke before dawn on the day of the challenge, her mind clear and focused. As she performed her morning stretches, she noticed her hands were steady despite the pressure weighing on her. Years of Olympic competition had taught her that the difference between victory and defeat often came down to one critical factor: believing in yourself when no one else does. By 09:00 hours, the pool area was packed with spectators. Word of the unprecedented challenge had spread throughout the base, drawing a crowd of curious onlookers eager to witness either a spectacular failure or an impossible triumph. The betting pool had grown even larger overnight, with side wagers now focusing on specific details. How long before she surfaces? Will she complete even 1 knot? Will she need medical assistance? Lieutenant Commander Reynolds stood at the edge of the pool, surrounded by his team, looking supremely confident as he held up a stopwatch. "Just to be clear about the parameters," he announced loudly. 5 knots, 5 minutes, no breathing apparatus. No surfacing until all knots are complete, or you give up. He emphasized the last 3 words with obvious expectation. Maya approached the water's edge with measured steps, her focus narrowing to exclude the noise and distractions around her. She could feel the weight of every doubtful stare as she performed her final breathing exercises, the same ritual the world had watched before her Olympic performances, but now with infinitely higher stakes. Commander Blackwood approached her with a surprising gesture of fairness. "You're entitled to inspect the ropes and anchoring system before we begin," he said professionally. "Standard protocol for all participants." This small acknowledgement of her as a legitimate participant, rather than a publicity Stunt was the first hint of respect she'd received all week. As Maya methodically checked each rope and anchor point, she detected subtle irregularities in the setup. The ropes were not the standard nylon used in training, but a stiffer, more water-resistant material that would be significantly harder to manipulate underwater. The positioning of the anchor points had been arranged to require more movement between stations, consuming precious oxygen. Rather than protest, Maya simply nodded her acceptance of the conditions. She had anticipated some form of final adjustment to ensure her failure. But what they didn't know was that she had trained with every conceivable material during her preparation, including the exact type of rope they had selected. The crowd grew silent as Maya took her position at the edge of the pool. The digital timer on the wall was set to 5 o'clock, ready to count down the seconds that would determine her fate. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds stood with his arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Richardson," Commander Blackwood announced formally. Maya closed her eyes for 3 seconds, performed her final preparation breath, a specialized 4-count inhale, followed by a 6-count breath hold and controlled 8-count exhale that her grandfather had perfected, and then took one massive, final breath that expanded her lung capacity to its absolute maximum. Without hesitation, she slipped into the water with barely a ripple, descending quickly to the bottom of the 12-foot pool where the first knot station awaited. The underwater cameras installed specifically for this challenge broadcast her movements onto large screens visible to all spectators. The first knot, a standard bowline, was completed in less than 20 seconds, her fingers moving with practiced precision despite the resistant material. Several SEALs nodded with grudging respect, but their expression suggested the real challenges were still to come. The second station required a more complex sheet bend knot, typically used to join ropes of different diameters. This was where most trainees began to struggle as carbon dioxide buildup started affecting fine motor control. Maya's movements remained fluid and economical, completing the knot in 35 seconds, faster than many qualified SEALs could manage with full oxygen levels. "She's pacing herself too quickly," one of the instructors commented. She burned through her oxygen reserve before the 4th station. Several others nodded in agreement, their expertise telling them that her current performance was unsustainable. As Maya moved to the 3rd station for the more challenging clove hitch, the crowd grew increasingly tense. She was now approaching the 2-minute mark, the point where oxygen deprivation typically began affecting cognitive function. Yet her movements showed no sign of deterioration or panic. Captain Harrison, watching through polarized sunglasses from the observation deck, leaned forward with growing interest. Her technique was unlike anything he'd seen before, a modified approach that minimized extraneous movement and preserved oxygen with extraordinary efficiency. This wasn't just an Olympic swimmer trying to pass a SEAL test. This was innovation happening before their eyes. The 3rd knot was completed at 2:45, leaving Maya with just over 2 minutes to complete the final 2 knots, the most difficult ones deliberately placed last in the sequence. The betting pool suddenly seemed less certain as Reynolds' confident expression began to falter. The 4th station presented the rolling hitch, a knot that required precise tension control and multiple wraps, often the breaking point for trainees as their hands began to tremble from oxygen starvation. Maya approached it with a technique none of the observers had seen before, using the momentum of the water itself to assist in creating the proper tension. "Where did she learn that?" Commander Blackwood whispered, his professional curiosity momentarily overriding his skepticism. The modified technique allowed her to complete the 4th knot in just 50 seconds, leaving her with a full minute and 25 seconds for the final challenge. The tension in the observation area was now palpable. The side bets were being hurriedly recalculated as Maya approached the final station. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds' earlier smugness had completely evaporated, replaced by visible concern as his $1,000 wager suddenly seemed in serious jeopardy. The final knot, An anchor bend, typically used to secure a rope to a ring or similar device, was the most complex in the sequence, requiring multiple passes and precise positioning. Under normal circumstances, it demanded at least 90 seconds of focused work, even for experienced personnel. Maya had just under 90 seconds of air remaining, according to conventional wisdom about human breath-holding capacities. As her hands worked with remarkable precision, the screen showed no indication of the trembling or fumbling that oxygen deprivation typically caused. Her movements remained deliberate and efficient, each motion serving a specific purpose with no wasted energy. The technique she employed wasn't just effective, it was beautiful in its economy and precision. With just 20 seconds left on the timer, Maya secured the final loop of the anchor bend and gave the finished knot the traditional tug to demonstrate its security. Then, rather than immediately surfacing as everyone expected, she methodically inspected each of the 5 completed knots, checking that they met the exact standards required. Only after this final verification, with just 7 seconds remaining on the clock, did Maya push off from the bottom and glide toward the surface, with the same controlled movements that had carried her to Olympic gold. She broke the water's surface with 5 seconds to spare, taking a calm, measured breath rather than the desperate gasping that most experienced after such extended submersion. The pool area erupted in stunned silence, followed by scattered applause that quickly grew into thunderous recognition of what they had just witnessed. Maya had not only completed the challenge, she had mastered it with a grace and efficiency that defied conventional understanding of human capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds stood frozen at the pool's edge, his expression a complex mixture of shock, disbelief, and reluctant respect. The carefully orchestrated plan to humiliate her through an impossible challenge had instead become a showcase for her extraordinary abilities. As Maya climbed out of the pool, water streaming from her shoulders, she didn't speak or celebrate. She simply reached for her towel, dried her face, and then extended her hand toward Reynolds. "I believe we had a wager, Lieutenant Commander," she said quietly, her voice steady despite having just completed what many considered a near-impossible challenge. The crowd of SEALs parted as Reynolds, his face flushed with a combination of embarrassment and grudging respect, reached for his wallet. One by one, the other betting participants followed suit, creating a small mountain of cash that represented not just money, but the collective price of their underestimation. "How?" was all Reynolds could manage to ask as he handed over his $1,000. "How did you do that when most of us can't?" Maya's response was measured and respectful, recognizing that this moment wasn't about humiliation, but education. "Oxygen efficiency isn't just about lung capacity," she explained. "It's about understanding how to minimize your body's consumption through movement economy and psychological control." She gestured toward the pool. "I'd be happy to demonstrate the techniques if you're interested in learning." The offer was sincere, not a victory lap, but a genuine extension of professional knowledge. The revelation that transformed the atmosphere came from Captain Harrison, who had made his way down from the observation deck. "Richardson," he said thoughtfully. "Any relation to Captain William Steady Hands Richardson from the 1980s rescue swimmer program?" Maya nodded. "My grandfather. He taught me everything I know about underwater composure." A murmur of recognition swept through the older SEALs. Captain William Richardson wasn't just any rescue swimmer. He had revolutionized underwater stress management techniques that were still foundational to naval rescue operations decades later. "Jesus Christ," Commander Blackwood whispered, his voice filled with newfound respect. William Richardson's breath control methods saved more lives during the Gulf operations than any piece of equipment we had. We still teach modified versions of his techniques in advanced courses. The revelation spread through the crowd like an electric current. This wasn't just an Olympic swimmer who had gotten lucky or pushed through on sheer athleticism. This was the legacy of a naval legend, refined and perfected through world-class athletic discipline. Maya stood on the pool deck, surrounded by a group of elite warriors whose expressions had transformed from dismissive to curious in the span of 5 minutes. The $30,000 in bet money was substantial, but it wasn't what mattered to her. What mattered was that she now had their attention and an opportunity to share what she knew. Your 5-minute demonstration has just revolutionized our understanding of underwater operations, Captain Harrison said, stepping forward with professional respect. I'd like to formally request that you consider extending your visit to develop a training module for our teams. Before Maya could respond, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds approached, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine professional interest. I owe you more than money, he said, removing his insignia cap. I owe you an apology. I completely misjudged your capabilities and character. What you just did wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary. Maya looked him in the eyes, her expression neither triumphant nor vindictive. Maintaining composure was the only option when everyone around me expected failure, she said. But I want you to understand something important. Your doubts didn't weaken me, they became my fuel. The transformation was immediate and profound. The same SEALs who had mockingly placed bets against her now gathered around, eager to learn the techniques that had allowed her to shatter their perceptions. The barriers that had seemed so impenetrable just hours before had dissolved in the face of undeniable excellence. Commander Blackwood cleared his throat, his usual gruffness softened by genuine professional respect. Ms. Richardson, would you be willing to demonstrate those modified breathing techniques to the entire Special Warfare Group? What you've shown us today could potentially save lives in underwater operations. Maya nodded, a small smile finally breaking through her composed exterior. That's why I came here in the first place. Not to prove anything personal, but because I believe these techniques can make a difference. She reached into her bag and pulled out her grandfather's weathered notebook. Everything in here was developed to keep operators alive in impossible situations. Within hours, what had begun as a humiliating challenge had transformed into an impromptu masterclass. Maya stood before 30 of America's most elite special operators, teaching the precise breathing methodology that had allowed her to remain calm and efficient in conditions designed to induce panic. The fundamental mistake most people make, she explained as the SEALs watched with rapt attention, is believing that holding your breath is about lung capacity. It's not. It's about minimizing oxygen consumption through 3 key principles: movement efficiency, carbon dioxide tolerance, and psychological control. She demonstrated the specialized 4-phase breathing technique her grandfather had developed, a precise ritual that maximized oxygen uptake while preparing the mind for extended deprivation. Your brain consumes nearly 20% of your body's oxygen, she continued. Learning to quiet unnecessary mental activity can extend your functional underwater time by almost 40%. Captain Harrison watched from the side, his expression thoughtful. In 25 years of special operations, he had witnessed countless demonstrations of physical courage, but Maya's calm, methodical approach represented something different, a perfect synthesis of physical ability and mental discipline. Would anyone like to try the technique? Maya asked, looking around the room. For a moment, no one moved. These were men unaccustomed to being students rather than masters of their domain. Then, surprisingly, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds stepped forward. I'll volunteer, he said, setting aside his pride with remarkable grace. If I'm going to lead my team effectively, I need to understand this firsthand. Maya guided him through the preparation breathing sequence, correcting his technique with the same patient precision she would use with an Olympic trainee. Now hold that final breath, she instructed. But instead of focusing on the discomfort, I want you to mentally catalog the sensations without judgment. Observe your body's signals without reacting to them. Reynolds lasted 3 minutes and 20 seconds, nearly a minute longer than his previous personal best on his first attempt with her technique. When he finally surfaced, gasping not from panic but controlled exertion, The look of revelation on his face spoke volumes. "It's like having access to a completely different operating system," he said, water streaming from his face. I felt the urge to breathe, but it didn't control me. I was aware of it, but not governed by it. One by one, other SEALs stepped forward to learn and practice the technique. With each successful demonstration, the atmosphere in the training facility transformed from skepticism to collective discovery. These hardened warriors, accustomed to pushing through pain through sheer willpower, were discovering a more sophisticated approach that conserved rather than depleted their resources. By late afternoon, Command Master Chief Peterson, the most senior enlisted leader at the facility and a man legendary for his stoic demeanor, approached Maya with unprecedented deference. "Ms. Richardson," he said quietly, "I've been conducting underwater operations for almost 30 years. What you've shown us today would have saved lives on at least 3 missions I personally led." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your grandfather's legacy and your refinements to his techniques represent a significant advancement in our capabilities." As the day's formal training concluded, Maya found herself surrounded by the same men who had dismissed her capabilities just hours before. Their questions were technical and precise, driven by professional curiosity rather than challenge. The transformation in their attitude wasn't just about respect, it was about recognition of valuable knowledge regardless of its source. Later that evening, as Maya gathered her equipment in the now empty training area, Captain Harrison approached her with a formal proposal. "The Naval Special Warfare Command would like to offer you a consulting position," he said, handing her an official document. "We'd like you to develop a comprehensive training program integrating your techniques into our underwater operations curriculum." Maya accepted the folder, momentarily speechless. This wasn't just validation, it was an opportunity to ensure her grandfather's methods would continue saving lives long after both of them were gone. "I'd be honored," she replied, "but I have one condition." Harrison raised an eyebrow, waiting. "The program needs to be accessible to all qualified naval personnel, not just special operations. These techniques can benefit every sailor who might find themselves underwater in a crisis." Harrison's expression shifted from surprise to thoughtful consideration. "That's actually a brilliant suggestion," he acknowledged. "Expanding the training beyond special operations could significantly improve survival rates across the entire fleet." As Maya walked back to her temporary quarters that night, the base felt like a completely different place. The hostile glances had been replaced by respectful nods, the whispers transformed into open professional curiosity. In less than 24 hours, she had gone from unwelcome outsider to valued contributor. The following morning, Maya arrived at the training facility to find an unexpected scene. The pool area had been reconfigured with multiple stations, and nearly 60 naval personnel, including several high-ranking officers not previously involved in her training, waited expectantly. Commander Blackwood approached with uncharacteristic warmth. "Word travels fast in the special operations community," he explained. "When something works, we don't waste time implementing it. These officers have flown in from 3 different naval installations to learn your techniques directly." The impromptu one-day demonstration had evolved into something much more significant. As Maya looked out at the assembled personnel, she recognized the magnitude of the moment. This wasn't about winning a bet or proving herself anymore. It was about transforming how an entire military branch approached underwater operations. For the next 3 days, Maya conducted intensive training sessions, breaking down complex physiological concepts into practical techniques that could be immediately implemented. She worked tirelessly, demonstrating each method personally before guiding others through the process with patient precision. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, a surprise visitor arrived at the facility. Admiral James Harrington, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, walked into the training area during a demonstration. The facility immediately snapped to attention, but the admiral waved them back to their activities. "Please continue," he said, his eyes fixed on Maya as she demonstrated a specialized recovery breathing technique to a group of combat divers. "I came to observe, not interrupt." For over an hour, the Admiral watched in silence as Maya worked with different groups, tailoring her instruction to their specific operational needs. When the session finally concluded, he approached her directly. "Ms. Richardson," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of command experience, "what I've witnessed today represents a paradigm shift in underwater operations training. Your grandfather's techniques, combined with your Olympic-level refinements, offer capabilities we haven't previously considered possible." Maya acknowledged the compliment with a respectful nod. But before she could respond, the Admiral continued, "I understand you've been offered a consulting position. I'd like to upgrade that offer to include curriculum development for all naval training facilities with underwater operations components." The significance of the offer wasn't lost on anyone present. This wasn't just a consulting job, it was an opportunity to transform training protocols across the entire United States Navy. "Admiral," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt, "I would be honored to accept that responsibility." As news of the Admiral's decision spread throughout the base, Maya noticed a profound shift in how she was perceived. The same special operators who had bet against her now pointed her out to newly arriving personnel with something approaching reverence. "That's Richardson," they'd say. "She's revolutionizing our underwater protocols." Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, perhaps the most transformed by the experience, approached her during a break between training sessions. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said, uncharacteristically reflective. "When you first arrived, we didn't just underestimate you, we actively tried to ensure you'd fail." Maya waited, sensing he had more to say. "The thing is," he continued, "in our world, that kind of resistance isn't unusual. We face hostile forces that actively work against our success. What you showed us wasn't just how to hold your breath longer. You demonstrated how to transform opposition into opportunity." His insight struck Maya deeply. She had never consciously articulated this philosophy, but it perfectly captured her approach, not just to the SEAL challenge, but to every obstacle she'd encountered throughout her career. "That's precisely what my grandfather taught me," she replied. "He used to say that the difference between victims and victors isn't the challenges they face, but how they respond to those challenges." The conversation was interrupted by a young ensign who approached with obvious hesitation. "Ms. Richardson," he said, his voice betraying his nervousness, "I'm scheduled for deployment next month on a submarine rescue team. I've always struggled with underwater anxiety. Would it be possible to get some additional coaching on the psychological techniques you mentioned?" Without hesitation, Maya agreed to meet with him after hours for specialized training. This, she realized, was the true victory, not the money she'd won or the professional recognition she'd received, but the opportunity to make a tangible difference in the lives of those who served. Over the next 2 weeks, Maya's temporary assignment expanded into a comprehensive training development project. Working closely with the base's instructional design team, she created a progressive curriculum that integrated her grandfather's techniques with modern understanding of human physiology and psychological performance. The program, officially designated Advanced Underwater Resilience Training, ART, was structured to address both the physical and mental aspects of extended submersion. What made it revolutionary wasn't just the breathing techniques, but the integrated approach that treated psychological composure as equally important to physical capability. On a warm Thursday afternoon, as Maya finished documenting a particularly complex sequence of preparatory breathing exercises, Captain Harrison entered the classroom with news that sent ripples through the entire program. "The Pentagon has taken notice," he announced without preamble. "Your techniques were employed during a classified operation last week. The details are restricted, but I'm authorized to tell you that 6 service members are alive today because of what you've taught us." Maya sat in stunned silence, the impact of his words washing over her. 6 lives saved. 6 families that wouldn't receive devastating news. 6 futures that would continue uninterrupted. In that moment, the significance of her work transcended any personal achievement or recognition. "There's more," Harrison continued. "Naval Special Warfare Command wants to formalize your role. They're creating a new position, Director of Underwater Resilience Training, and they want you to fill it. This wouldn't be a temporary consulting role. This would be a permanent position developing advanced protocols for the entire Naval Special Warfare community." The offer was unprecedented. Civilian specialists occasionally consulted with military units, but permanent directorial positions were almost exclusively reserved for career military personnel or former operators. This represented not just acceptance of her methods, but a fundamental rethinking of how expertise was valued regardless of its source. "I need some time to consider," Maya said thoughtfully. The offer was professionally extraordinary, but accepting would mean stepping away from her Olympic training and competitive swimming career. Significant personal sacrifice. Harrison nodded understanding. "Take whatever time you need. This isn't a decision to rush." As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Just so you know," he added quietly, "Lieutenant Commander Reynolds and his team will be implementing your techniques during their deployment next month. Whatever you decide about the position, your impact is already being felt where it matters most." That evening, Maya sat alone on the beach adjacent to the naval facility, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in brilliant oranges and purples. In her hand, she held her grandfather's weathered notebook, its pages filled with wisdom that had waited decades to find its fullest expression. Her phone buzzed with a notification, an email from her Olympic coach, outlining the training schedule for the upcoming season and expressing concern about her extended absence. The competitive swimming world continued its rhythm without her, the next games already appearing on the horizon. As she weighed her options, Maya realized she was facing a profound choice between 2 worthy paths. Returning to competitive swimming meant pursuing personal excellence and national pride through Olympic achievement. Accepting the naval position meant potentially saving lives and transforming how an entire military branch operated underwater. The vibration of her phone interrupted her thoughts. A text message from an unknown number. "This is Ensign Michael Collins. Just wanted to let you know I completed my first full underwater confidence course today using your techniques. Couldn't have done it without your help. Thanks for taking the time to work with me personally." Maya smiled as she read the message, remembering the nervous young officer who had approached her for additional training. His success represented exactly what she had hoped to achieve by sharing her knowledge. As darkness settled over the ocean, Maya made her decision. The Olympics had given her a platform and recognition, but this new opportunity offered something more meaningful, the chance to create a legacy that would continue saving lives long after her competitive days were over. The following morning, Maya walked into Captain Harrison's office with calm certainty. "I'd like to accept the position," she said without preamble. "But I have 2 conditions." Harrison gestured for her to continue. "First, I want to establish a scholarship program for young swimmers from disadvantaged backgrounds to train in these techniques. Not just for military applications, but for civilian water safety as well." Harrison nodded. "That's completely reasonable. And your second condition?" "I want my grandfather's name and methods formally recognized in the program materials. His work deserves to be credited as the foundation of these techniques." "Consider both conditions approved," Harrison replied without hesitation. "Your grandfather's contributions will be prominently acknowledged, and the scholarship program can be implemented immediately. Welcome aboard, Director Richardson." As they shook hands to formalize the agreement, Maya felt a profound sense of rightness in her decision. The path ahead would be challenging. Integrating civilian techniques into military protocols would require navigating complex bureaucracies and institutional resistance, She had already proven her ability to transform opposition into opportunity. 3 weeks later, Maya stood before the first official class of the Advanced Underwater Resilience Training Program. 36 special operators from various naval units sat before her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and professional assessment. Among them was Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, who had requested assignment to the inaugural class despite his impending deployment. His presence represented the program's most significant early victory, the transformation of her most vocal critic into her most committed advocate. "Before we begin," Maya said, addressing the group with quiet confidence, "I want to share something my grandfather told me that applies to both underwater operations and life itself." She paused, making eye contact with Reynolds before continuing. "He said that when you're underwater and feel the pressure building, remember this truth. Pressure is just the universe's way of showing you how much force you can withstand without breaking." As nods of recognition moved through the group, Maya knew she had found her true purpose. The bet that had begun as a challenge to her abilities had transformed into an opportunity that would ripple through countless lives. The 30 SEALs who had wagered against her hadn't just lost their money, they had gained a new perspective on human potential that would serve them in every future mission. "Now," she said, opening her grandfather's notebook to the first page, "let's learn how to make the impossible possible, one breath at a time." 6 months into Maya's tenure as Director of Underwater Resilience Training, the program had expanded beyond anyone's expectations. What had begun as a specialized curriculum for elite naval operators had evolved into a comprehensive training methodology being implemented across multiple branches of the military. Her techniques weren't just changing training protocols, they were transforming operational capabilities in ways that rippled through the entire defense establishment. On a crisp autumn morning, Maya stood at the edge of the advanced training pool, clipboard in hand, observing a group of 20 combat divers implementing her integrated breathing movement protocol. The transformation in their underwater efficiency was remarkable, where standard techniques had allowed for approximately 12 minutes of effective operation. Her methods had extended that to nearly 20 minutes, while simultaneously reducing physical strain and cognitive decline. "Impressive results," said a voice behind her. Maya turned to find Admiral Harrington observing the session, his experienced eyes missing nothing. "The data from the first operational deployments using your protocols just came in. Mission endurance is up 62%, and we've seen a 78% reduction in underwater stress incidents. The numbers speak for themselves." Maya nodded, grateful for the validation, but more focused on the areas still needing refinement. "We're making good progress, but there's more to develop. The integration between breathing techniques and movement efficiency still needs work, especially under high-stress conditions." The Admiral smiled at her characteristic perfectionism. "That's why you're here. Always pushing the boundaries of what's possible." He handed her a classified folder. "I need you to review this. It's a proposal for implementing your techniques in an upcoming special reconnaissance operation. Highly classified, of course." As Maya reviewed the operational parameters, she realized the mission would require extended underwater transit through particularly challenging conditions, precisely the scenario her advanced techniques had been designed to address. The implications were clear. Her work would directly impact a critical national security operation. "I'll need to develop some specialized protocols for this particular environment," she said, already mentally calculating the adjustments needed for the temperature and current conditions outlined in the brief. "When do they deploy?" 3 weeks, the Admiral replied. "I've arranged for the operational team to rotate through your advanced program starting tomorrow. They're some of our best, but they'll need accelerated training to integrate these techniques before deployment." Later that afternoon, Maya was introduced to the 8-person Special Operations team that would be implementing her protocols. Their team leader, Lieutenant Alex Mercer, approached with professional curiosity rather than the skepticism she had initially encountered months earlier. Her reputation now preceded her. "Director Richardson," he said, extending his hand. "Your techniques have been generating quite a buzz throughout the special operations community. We're looking forward to learning directly from the source." The team's expertise was evident in their questions, precise, technically sophisticated inquiries that demonstrated their deep understanding of underwater operations. They weren't merely following orders to receive the training. They were genuinely interested in mastering techniques that could expand their capabilities. Over the next 2 weeks, Maya worked directly with the team, tailoring her protocols to their specific mission parameters. The standard ARC program was comprehensive, but the specialized application required adaptations for the unique challenges they would face: near freezing water temperatures, extended duration, and complex underwater navigation through unfamiliar territory. During one particularly intensive training session, Maya noticed something that concerned her. Lieutenant Mercer, despite his exceptional physical conditioning and technical proficiency, showed subtle signs of hesitation during simulated emergency protocols, a barely perceptible delay in response time that others might have missed, but that Maya's experienced eye immediately identified. After dismissing the rest of the team, she approached him directly. "Lieutenant, I noticed a pattern during the emergency simulation. There's something interfering with your implementation of the recovery breathing sequence. Mind telling me what's happening?" Mercer's expression revealed surprise at her perception, followed by reluctant acknowledgement. "Nothing that will affect the mission, ma'am." Maya held his gaze steadily. In underwater operations, milliseconds matter. If there's something affecting your performance, we need to address it before deployment. After a moment's hesitation, Mercer nodded. 3 years ago, I experienced a near-drowning incident during a training exercise. Equipment failure, my regulator malfunctioned at depth. Logically, I've moved past it, but there's still a hesitation during certain emergency scenarios. His admission represented a significant level of trust. In the elite special operations community, acknowledging psychological barriers was often perceived as weakness, something many operators would rather hide than address directly. "Thank you for telling me," Maya said. "That kind of experience leaves traces, even in the most highly trained operators. But here's the thing, we can actually use that experience to enhance your performance rather than hinder it." Over the next 3 days, Maya worked individually with Mercer, developing a specialized protocol that incorporated his past trauma as a component of his training rather than an obstacle to overcome. By acknowledging the physiological fear response and integrating it into his breathing technique, she helped him transform a potential liability into an asset. "The body remembers trauma," she explained during their final session. "We can't erase that memory, but we can change how we respond to it. Your experience gives you an awareness of danger that others don't have, a heightened sensitivity that can actually improve your response time once you learn to channel it properly." By the end of their specialized training, Mercer's performance metrics showed remarkable improvement. His response time during emergency scenarios had decreased by 23%, and his oxygen efficiency had increased by 17%, crucial margins that could make the difference between success and failure in the field. The evening before the team's deployment, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, now a staunch advocate of the ARC program, visited Maya in her office. Since their initial confrontation 6 months earlier, he had become one of her most valuable collaborators, implementing her techniques in real-world operations and providing critical feedback for program refinement. "I just completed the operational readiness review for Mercer's team," he said, setting a folder on her desk. "They're showing the highest underwater efficiency metrics we've ever recorded. Whatever specialized training you've been doing with them, it's working." Maya nodded, maintaining the confidentiality of her work with Mercer while acknowledging the team's overall progress. "They're exceptional operators to begin with. The techniques just help them maximize their existing capabilities." Reynolds smiled knowingly. That's what you always say, but we both know it's more than that. Your methods aren't just incremental improvements, they're revolutionary. He paused, studying her expression. You know, when you first arrived, I was convinced you were going to fail spectacularly. Now I can't imagine our program without your innovations. His candid admission highlighted how far they had come from adversaries to respected colleagues, united by a shared commitment to excellence. The best innovations often come from unexpected sources, Maya replied. Sometimes we need outsiders to help us see beyond our established methods. Speaking of innovation, Reynolds said, changing the subject, I heard about the scholarship program you've established. 20 young swimmers from underprivileged communities, training in advanced water safety and rescue techniques. That's going to change lives. Maya smiled, genuinely pleased by his recognition of the initiative closest to her heart. While her military training programs received the most attention, the civilian applications of her techniques, particularly for communities with limited access to formal swimming instruction, represented her most meaningful legacy. Water doesn't discriminate, she said simply. Everyone deserves the knowledge to stay safe, regardless of their background or resources. The following morning, Maya watched as Mercer's team departed for their classified mission, carrying her techniques into one of the most challenging underwater environments on Earth. Despite her confidence in their training, she felt the weight of responsibility. These 8 individuals would be putting their lives on the line, partially relying on methods she had developed. For the next 11 days, Maya continued her regular training duties while waiting for news of the operation. The nature of classified missions meant she might never learn the details of how her techniques had performed under actual operational conditions, a reality of working within the military's compartmentalized information structure. On the 12th day, as she was concluding an advanced instructor certification course, Maya received an unexpected summons to Admiral Harrington's office. Such direct communication from the Admiral typically signaled either extremely good news or serious problems. When she arrived, the presence of several high-ranking officers suggested this was no routine meeting. Admiral Harrington gestured for her to take a seat before addressing the assembled group. As you know, we recently deployed a specialized team implementing Director Richardson's advanced underwater protocols in a highly sensitive operation. He paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. What you don't know is that this mission involved the covert inspection of a suspected hostile intelligence gathering installation located in Arctic waters in conditions that would normally be considered beyond human endurance. The Admiral activated a secure display screen showing a satellite image of an ice-covered region. The team was tasked with conducting close reconnaissance of this structure, requiring an underwater approach of nearly 2 miles through near-freezing temperatures, with limited equipment to avoid detection. Maya felt her breath catch as she realized the extreme conditions Mercer's team had faced, far more challenging than even the rigorous scenarios they had trained for. Under standard protocols, this mission would have been considered impossible without specialized submersibles, which would have significantly increased the risk of detection, the Admiral continued. Using Director Richardson's techniques, our operators were able to complete the entire approach undetected, gather critical intelligence, and extract without incident. He turned to Maya, his expression solemn but appreciative. The team leader specifically credited your specialized training with their success. According to his report, and I quote, "The advanced breathing and thermal regulation techniques were the decisive factor in mission completion. Without Director Richardson's protocols, this operation would have been beyond human capability." The significance of the statement wasn't lost on anyone in the room. In the cautious language of military after-action reports, such direct attribution was exceedingly rare. Additionally, the Admiral continued, there was an unexpected development during the operation. A sudden shift in underwater currents forced the team to extend their return journey by approximately 40%. pushing well beyond their planned endurance limits. Lieutenant Mercer reports that the emergency extension protocols she developed enabled them to complete the extended transit without casualty. What the Admiral didn't say, but what Maya immediately understood, was that without those specific protocols, the team might not have survived the unexpected challenge. The specialized training she had developed for Mercer after identifying his hesitation had likely saved not just the mission but the lives of all 8 operators. After the briefing concluded and the other officers had departed, Admiral Harrington asked Maya to remain behind. "There's something else you should know," he said once they were alone. Lieutenant Mercer included a personal note in his classified report. He said that your work with him on overcoming his previous trauma was, in his words, the difference between success and failure when the situation deteriorated. The Admiral studied her thoughtfully. Most people would have just focused on the technical aspects of the training. You saw something deeper, a human factor that others missed, and addressed it directly. That kind of perception can't be taught. Maya accepted the compliment with a modest nod, but inside she felt a profound sense of validation. The technical aspects of her program were important, but it was this deeper understanding, the integration of psychological and physiological factors that truly distinguished her approach. "The Pentagon has taken notice," the Admiral continued. "They're expanding your program's funding by 300% for the coming fiscal year, with authorization to establish a URT training centers at 3 additional naval facilities. Your grandfather's techniques, combined with your innovations, are becoming the new standard for underwater operations across all special warfare units." The expansion represented institutional validation, at the highest level recognition that her methods weren't just valuable supplements to existing protocols, but fundamental advancements that merited comprehensive implementation. 2 weeks later, Maya stood before a much larger audience than she had ever anticipated addressing. The auditorium at the Naval Special Warfare Center was filled with over 300 personnel, including commanding officers from every major special operations command and representatives from allied military organizations. The conference, titled Next Generation Underwater Operations, had been organized specifically to showcase the AURT program's success and explore its wider applications. Maya had been asked to deliver the keynote address, a platform that would allow her to articulate not just the technical aspects of her methodology, but the philosophical foundation that undergirded it. As she approached the podium, Maya felt a momentary flash of the same nervousness she had experienced 6 months earlier when facing 30 skeptical SEALs. But this time, she was surrounded by allies rather than doubters, addressing an audience eager to learn rather than waiting for her to fail. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and confident. "6 months ago, I stood at the edge of a training pool facing a room full of elite operators who had collectively bet $30,000 that I would fail their underwater challenge. Their skepticism wasn't personal. It was the natural response to someone they perceived as an outsider, presuming to teach them about their area of expertise." A ripple of knowing laughter moved through the audience, many of whom were familiar with the now legendary story of her arrival at the base. "Today, I want to talk about something more important than breathing techniques or movement efficiency," Maya continued. "I want to talk about the fundamental principle that has guided every aspect of the AURT program's development, the relationship between limitation and possibility." She paused, making eye contact with familiar faces in the audience: Reynolds, Harrison, Mercer, and others who had been part of her journey from outsider to insider. Conventional thinking tells us that human capability is defined by our limitations, that there are fixed boundaries to what the human body and mind can achieve, especially in extreme environments like prolonged underwater immersion. But what my grandfather discovered, and what I've spent my career refining, is that these supposed limitations are far more flexible than we assume. Maya displayed a series of performance metrics showing the dramatic improvements achieved by ORC-trained personnel. These aren't just incremental gains. They represent fundamental shifts in what we consider humanly possible. And they weren't achieved by ignoring physical limitations, but by developing a deeper understanding of how those limitations actually function. She continued, her passion evident as she described the integration of psychological and physiological factors that defined her approach. The mind and body aren't separate systems. They're integrated aspects of a single system that constantly influence each other. When we treat them as separate domains, we miss the most powerful opportunities for performance enhancement. As she spoke, Maya could see the audience's engagement deepening. These weren't abstract concepts to them, but practical realities that directly impacted their operational capabilities and potentially their survival. The most valuable lesson I've learned in developing this program isn't about underwater operations. Specifically, it's about human potential more broadly. Every supposed limitation contains within it the seed of new possibility if we're willing to examine it closely enough. She shared specific examples from the program's development, how understanding the precise mechanisms of cold water shock had led to techniques that transformed it from a debilitating response to a manageable condition. How studying panic responses had revealed methods to maintain cognitive function under extreme stress. The operators who initially bet against me weren't wrong to question whether an Olympic swimmer could teach them anything valuable about their specialized domain. Maya acknowledged, skepticism is a natural and healthy response to new ideas. But the willingness to move beyond that initial skepticism, to remain open to unexpected sources of knowledge, is what allows us to transcend our perceived limitations. As she concluded her address, Maya revealed the newest initiative growing out of the ART program, a collaborative research project bringing together elite athletes, special operators, and medical researchers to explore the furthest boundaries of human performance in extreme environments. This isn't just about underwater operations anymore, she explained. The principles we've developed have applications across multiple domains, from high-altitude operations to extreme temperature environments, from extended endurance scenarios to rapid crisis response situations. The standing ovation that followed her presentation represented more than professional courtesy. It was recognition of a genuine paradigm shift in how the special operations community approached human performance. Ideas that had once seemed radical were now being embraced as the new foundation for operational excellence. After the conference concluded, Maya found herself surrounded by representatives from various military and civilian organizations, all eager to explore potential applications of her methodologies in their specific domains. The betting pool that had been intended to humiliate her had instead become the catalyst for a movement that was redefining human potential across multiple fields. As the crowd thinned, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds approached with a small wrapped package. A token of appreciation from the original betting pool participants, he said with a smile that acknowledged the irony. We thought you might appreciate the symbolism. Inside the package, Maya found a custom-designed challenge coin, a traditional military token of recognition featuring the ART program logo on one side and a simple inscription on the reverse, from 30,000 lost to countless lives gained. The coin represented more than just acknowledgement of her success. It symbolized the complete transformation in how she was perceived by the community that had initially rejected her. What had begun as a bet against her capabilities had evolved into recognition of her contribution to their collective mission. We had it all wrong in the beginning, Reynolds admitted. We saw you as someone trying to prove something to us. We didn't realize you were actually offering us something invaluable. Maya smiled, turning the coin over in her hand. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most challenging packages, she replied. Your skepticism pushed me to develop these techniques more thoroughly than I might have otherwise. In a way, that betting pool was the best thing that could have happened. As she looked around at the facility that had once seemed so hostile, but now felt like a second home, Maya reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. The Navy SEALs had bet $1,000 that she would fail their test in under 5 minutes. Instead, she had given them techniques that would save countless lives for generations to come. The wager had been about money and pride, but the outcome had transcended, both creating a legacy that would endure long after all of them were gone. In the final analysis, everyone had won something far more valuable than cash or recognition. They had gained a new understanding of human potential that would ripple through countless operations, saving lives and expanding capabilities in ways none of them could have imagined that first day by the pool. 5 years had passed since that fateful day when Maya Richardson walked onto the pool deck of the Naval Special Warfare Training Center to face 30 skeptical Navy SEALs and their $1,000 bet. What had begun as a singular demonstration had evolved into something far greater than anyone could have imagined, a comprehensive revolution in human performance that reached far beyond military applications. On a bright spring morning, Maya stood at the podium of a prestigious medical conference, facing an audience that would have been unimaginable during those early days: neuroscientists, elite athletes, medical researchers, astronaut candidates, and rescue specialists from around the world. The annual Human Performance in Extreme Environments Symposium had grown from a small military-focused gathering to an international event drawing experts across multiple disciplines. Today marks the 5th anniversary of the Advanced Underwater Resilience Training Program Maya began, her confidence now that of a recognized authority rather than an outsider fighting for acceptance. What started as a bet against failure has evolved into a global movement, transforming how we understand human capability in challenging environments. The screens behind her displayed a map highlighting ORT training centers established across 5 continents, military facilities, civilian rescue organizations, and scientific research institutions, all implementing variations of the methodology she had pioneered. The numbers tell a compelling story, she continued, transitioning to data slides showing the program's impact. Over 5,000 military personnel trained in advanced protocols. 473 documented life-saving implementations in operational settings. Rescue efficiency improved by 64% across participating organizations. But behind these statistics are real people with real stories of survival that wouldn't have been possible without these techniques. The audience listened attentively as Maya shared several of these stories: a Coast Guard rescue swimmer who had maintained consciousness for unprecedented time in frigid Alaskan waters to save a family of 4. A cave rescue team in Thailand that had navigated flooded passages that would have previously been considered impossible to traverse. Astronauts implementing modified versions of her breathing techniques during emergency simulations in the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. What makes these techniques revolutionary isn't their complexity, it's their accessibility, Maya emphasized. The fundamental principles can be taught to virtually anyone with proper instruction. This isn't about creating superhuman capabilities for the elite few. It's about expanding human potential for everyone. As she continued her presentation, Maya reflected on how far the program had come from its contentious beginnings. The original bet that she would fail had transformed into a catalyst for innovation that was now saving lives daily across the globe. After the symposium concluded, Maya found herself approached by a woman she didn't recognize, middle-aged, with the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. "Ms. Richardson," the woman said, extending her hand. "Sarah Donovan, North Pacific Search and Rescue. I've been hoping to thank you personally for quite some time." Maya shook her hand, smiling warmly but unsure of the specific connection. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Donovan. How is NPSA implementing the protocols?" "That's not why I wanted to thank you," Sarah replied, her voice catching slightly with emotion. 3 years ago, my son was on a fishing vessel that capsized in the Bering Sea. The water temperature was just above freezing. According to everything we know about survival times in those conditions, he should have died before rescue arrived. She paused, gathering herself before continuing. But the Coast Guard rescue swimmer who reached him, Lieutenant Marcus Torres, had been through your program. He implemented the emergency heat preservation technique with my son until the helicopter could extract them. The doctors said it was impossible for anyone to survive that long in those conditions, but here we are. Maya felt a wave of emotion at the direct connection between her work and this very real, very personal outcome. The technique she had developed in response to a dismissive challenge had directly contributed to saving this woman's son. Lieutenant Torres is actually here at the conference, Sarah continued. He's been hoping to meet you as well. Later that evening, at a reception following the day's sessions, Maya found herself in conversation with the Coast Guard rescue swimmer who had implemented her techniques in that dramatic Bering Sea rescue. The conventional wisdom said it was impossible, Lieutenant Torres explained, describing the rescue in detail. The survival charts gave him minutes, not the nearly hour it took for extraction. But your thermoregulation protocol completely changed the equation. It wasn't just that it extended his survival time, it allowed me to keep him conscious and responsive, which made the helicopter extraction infinitely easier. That's precisely what these techniques were designed to do, Maya replied. Not to defy physics, but to work with the body's natural systems more efficiently than traditional methods. Torres nodded, his expression thoughtful. You know what's interesting? When I first heard about your program, I was skeptical, not because you were a civilian or a woman, but because the claim seemed so extraordinary. But now, having used these techniques in actual rescue operations, I've become something of an evangelist. I've personally trained over 200 other rescue personnel. His experience mirrored a pattern Maya had observed repeatedly: initial skepticism, transformed into passionate advocacy once the techniques proved their value in real-world applications. The expansion of the program hadn't required aggressive promotion. It had spread organically through practitioners who had experienced its benefits firsthand. The following morning, Maya visited a facility that represented one of the most meaningful expansions of her work, the William Richardson Youth Aquatic Safety Center, named in honor of her grandfather. Located in an underserved community with historically high drowning rates, the center provided free water safety training using modified versions of the AURT protocols, adapted for children and teens. As Maya entered the facility, she was greeted by the sight of 30 children in the pool, practicing controlled breathing exercises under the guidance of instructors, many of them graduates of her military program, who volunteered their time to this community initiative. Ms. Richardson, called out a voice she recognized immediately. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, now Captain Reynolds, approached with a warm smile. Dressed not in his usual military attire, but in casual clothes appropriate for pool instruction. Welcome to Chaos Central. Today's our biggest class yet. The transformation in Reynolds over the years had been particularly meaningful to Maya. From her most vocal critic, he had become one of her most dedicated supporters, particularly in adapting the military techniques for civilian applications. The kids are making incredible progress, he said, gesturing toward the pool. Last week, 10-year-old Jasmine held her breath for 3 minutes using the progressive relaxation technique. Her mother couldn't believe it. Maya watched the children practicing with focused determination. How's the data collection coming along? She asked, referring to the longitudinal study they had implemented to track the program's impact on community water safety metrics. Better than we expected, Reynolds replied. In communities where we've implemented the youth program, drowning incidents have decreased by 72% over 3 years. The county is looking to expand the program to every public school in the district. This aspect of her work, bringing life-saving techniques to communities that historically lacked access to advanced water safety training, represented the fulfillment of a promise Maya had made to herself when she first accepted the naval position. The military applications were important, but ensuring these skills reached vulnerable populations was equally critical to her mission. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," Reynolds said, gesturing toward a teenage boy helping younger children with their technique at the shallow end of the pool. "That's Miguel Ramirez, one of our first students from 5 years ago. He's starting at the Naval Academy next fall, planning to become a rescue swimmer. Your program didn't just teach him water safety, it gave him a career path." As Maya observed the teenager patiently guiding younger children through the breathing exercises, she felt a profound sense of continuity. The techniques her grandfather had developed, which she had refined through her Olympic training and then adapted for military applications, were now being passed to a new generation who would continue to evolve and improve them. Later that afternoon, Maya attended a ceremony that represented the most unexpected outcome of her work: the dedication of a new research wing at the National Institutes of Health focused on environmental physiology and human performance. The facility would bring together medical researchers, performance specialists, and practitioners to further develop the scientific understanding that underpinned her techniques. Dr. Elizabeth Chun, the neurophysiologist heading the new research division, had approached Maya 3 years earlier after witnessing a demonstration of the AURT protocols. "What you've developed intuitively through practical application represents a paradigm shift in how we understand the interaction between psychological and physiological responses," she had explained. "We need to study these mechanisms systematically to understand their full implications." The resulting collaboration had produced groundbreaking research demonstrating that the techniques Maya had developed weren't just practical skills but represented fundamental insights into human physiological adaptation. The research had applications extending far beyond underwater operations, from treatment protocols for anxiety disorders to pain management techniques for chronic conditions. As Maya took her place on the stage for the dedication ceremony, she found herself seated beside Admiral Harrington, now approaching retirement, but still a steadfast advocate for her program. "Did you ever imagine, when you first walked onto that pool deck, that it would lead to all this?" he asked quietly as they waited for the ceremony to begin. Maya smiled, thinking back to that pivotal moment when she had faced a room full of skeptics, convinced of her imminent failure. "Honestly? No, I was just focused on proving I belonged in that pool. And now you've changed how the entire world approaches human performance in extreme environments," the Admiral observed. "Not bad for someone they bet against." The dedication ceremony included video testimonials from individuals whose lives had been directly impacted by Maya's work, military personnel who had survived previously unsurvivable situations, civilian rescue workers who had saved lives using her techniques, medical patients who had benefited from clinical applications of her protocols, and children from underserved communities who had gained not just safety skills but confidence through her youth programs. When it was Maya's turn to speak, she approached the podium with the same quiet confidence she had displayed that first day at the Naval Special Warfare Training Center. 5 years ago, 30 Navy SEALs bet $1,000 that I would fail their underwater test, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. They were so certain of my limitations that they were willing to put money on it. What none of us realized at the time was that this bet wasn't really about me at all. It was about testing the boundaries of what we believed to be possible. She paused, making eye contact with familiar faces in the audience: Reynolds, Harrison, Mercer, and many others who had been part of her journey. "The most dangerous limitations we face aren't physical, they're conceptual," she continued. "When we decide something is impossible, we stop trying to achieve it. When we prejudge someone's capabilities based on appearance or background, we close ourselves off to valuable knowledge." Those 30 SEALs didn't just bet against me. They bet against the possibility that their established methods could be improved upon. Maya gestured toward the entrance of the new research facility. "This center represents the opposite approach, a commitment to continuously questioning our assumptions about human capability. The research conducted here will push boundaries we haven't even identified yet, not by dismissing conventional wisdom, but by systematically testing and expanding it. As she concluded her remarks, Maya shared the philosophical core that had guided her work from the beginning. My grandfather used to say that the human body is infinitely more capable than the human mind believes it to be. Our true limitations aren't determined by physics or physiology, but by our willingness to challenge our assumptions about what's possible. Every breakthrough begins with someone questioning a limitation that everyone else has accepted as fact. The standing ovation that followed represented not just appreciation for her words, but recognition of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from facing skepticism and derision to leading a global movement that was redefining human performance across multiple domains. After the ceremony, as Maya mingled with colleagues and supporters, she found herself approached by a young woman in a wheelchair, a Paralympic swimmer she recognized from recent international competitions. "Ms. Richardson," the athlete said, extending her hand, "I've been implementing modified versions of your techniques in my training. They've completely transformed my approach to breath control and energy management." Maya smiled, immediately engaged. "I'd love to hear more about your adaptations." The protocols were designed to be flexible. Different bodies required different approaches. Their conversation quickly evolved into a detailed technical discussion about how the standard AURT protocols could be further modified for athletes with different physical capabilities. This was what truly energized Maya, not the accolades or institutional recognition, but the ongoing evolution of the methodology through creative application in diverse contexts. As the evening concluded, Maya found herself standing with Captain Reynolds on the balcony overlooking the illuminated research facility. "Remember when I thought you were just a publicity stunt?" he asked with self-deprecating humor. "I was so convinced of my own expertise that I couldn't see the value you were offering." Maya laughed, their former adversarial relationship now a running joke between them. "To be fair, I didn't exactly arrive with impressive credentials in military operations. An Olympic medal doesn't normally qualify someone to revolutionize special operations training." "That's precisely what made your perspective so valuable," Reynolds replied, suddenly serious. "You weren't constrained by our institutional assumptions. You looked at the same problems we'd been studying for decades and saw possibilities we had missed because we were too close to our own traditions." His observation captured the essence of what had made her approach revolutionary, not that she was inherently more knowledgeable than the military experts, but that she brought a fundamentally different perspective that allowed for new insights. "The real legacy of your work isn't just the techniques themselves," Reynolds continued. "It's how you've changed our approach to knowledge itself. We're much more open to expertise from unexpected sources now. That $1,000 bet against you might be the best investment the Navy ever made, considering the return we've received." The next morning, Maya returned to the pool where it had all begun, the training facility at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Unlike her first visit, she wasn't met with skeptical stares, but with respectful nods from instructors and trainees who recognized her immediately. The facility had changed significantly over the years, with specialized equipment now installed to support the AURT protocols she had developed. What hadn't changed was the fundamental challenge it represented, the unforgiving environment of water that demanded respect from even the most elite operators. As she observed a class of new trainees implementing her techniques, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The $1,000 bet that she would fail had been transformed into a catalyst for innovation that had saved countless lives and expanded human potential across multiple domains. The true victory wasn't that she had won the bet or proven the skeptics wrong. The victory was that those same skeptics had become her most dedicated advocates once they recognized the value of what she offered. The transformation wasn't just in techniques or protocols, but in mindsets, from closed certainty to open possibility. As Maya prepared to leave the facility, she paused by the pool edge where she had faced her challenge 5 years earlier. The water reflected the morning light, appearing simultaneously peaceful and powerful, much like the technique she had developed to work with it, rather than against it. A young ensign approached her hesitantly. "Ms. Richardson," he said, his voice betraying his nervousness. "I just wanted to say thank you. My brother is a pararescue jumper with the Air Force. Last year, he used your cold water survival protocol during a mission in the North Atlantic. The official report said survival should have been impossible given the conditions, but he made it. Your work is the reason I still have a brother." This was the true measure of her success, not the research facilities or training centers bearing her name, but the lives touched and saved through the knowledge she had shared. What had begun as a challenge to her own capabilities had expanded into a gift for countless others facing their own impossible situations. Later that day, Maya attended a ceremony marking the graduation of the latest URT instructor, Class 50 specialized trainers who would take the protocols to military and civilian organizations around the world. Among them were former Olympic athletes, military operators, civilian rescue specialists, and medical professionals, a diverse group united by their commitment to expanding human potential in challenging environments. As she delivered the commencement address, Maya reflected on how far they had come from that initial bet. 5 years ago, 30 Navy SEALs were so certain of my limitations that they bet $1,000 on my failure. Today, those same techniques, they doubted, have been implemented by over 20,000 trained personnel worldwide and have directly contributed to saving more than 2,000 lives in situations previously considered unsurvivable. She looked out at the faces of the graduating instructors, men and women who would carry these techniques to new environments and applications she hadn't even imagined yet. But the most important lesson wasn't about breathing techniques or thermoregulation. It was about challenging assumptions, both our assumptions about others and our assumptions about what's possible. As the graduates received their certifications, Maya felt a profound sense of continuity. The techniques her grandfather had developed, which she had refined through years of Olympic training and then adapted for military applications, would continue evolving long after her direct involvement ended. Each graduate would adapt and improve the protocols based on their unique experiences and challenges. "Your greatest contribution won't be perfectly replicating what I've taught you," she told them as the ceremony concluded. "It will be discovering new applications and refinements I haven't even considered. The next breakthrough is waiting for someone willing to question what the rest of us have accepted as fact." The $1,000 bet that had been intended to humiliate her had instead become the catalyst for a movement that was redefining human potential across multiple domains. The Navy SEALs had bet on her failure, but in doing so, they had inadvertently created the conditions for extraordinary success, not just for Maya personally, but for everyone who benefited from the techniques that challenge had inspired. In the end, the bet wasn't about money or pride at all. It was about challenging limitations, both those imposed by others and those we place on ourselves. The 30 SEALs who had wagered against Maya hadn't just lost their money. They had gained a new perspective on human potential that would serve them in every future mission and save countless lives in the process. As Maya watched the new instructors disperse to begin their work around the world, she knew that the true legacy of that bet would continue growing long after all of them were gone, a ripple effect of expanded possibility touching lives she would never know and in ways she could never anticipate. The $1,000 bet against her capabilities had been transformed into an investment in human potential with immeasurable returns. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.